Hey guys, Fox here, and today it's time to do the second United Football League 2024 College Draft recap in the Houston Roughnecks. Like I said in the last one, we are going to be doing these based on the draft order, so today is the second one, and we are doing the Houston Roughnecks. Now, the Roughnecks are a team that finished 1-9, the worst team in the league, but because they lost the Week 10 game to the Showboats, they lost the right to the first overall pick to Memphis, so they had to pick second across the entire draft. Now, the Roughnecks have a lot they need to fix. And so we're going to be talking about, just like last time, we're going to look at each and every pick, talk about them, as well as doing an overall draft grade. Remember, I am doing 2 of these a day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, be notified as soon as I upload any of them. And without further ado, let's get started with the second overall pick, Awabi Oki. Now, this was a pick that kind of showcased what the Roughnecks are going to do the entire draft, for the most part. Drafting players who are not currently on an NFL roster. Now, yes, some of these guys will end up being on one, but for the most part, a lot of these guys that currently aren't will have to get lucky with players getting injured, getting opportunities and all that. But the fact is, this is a guy who was not currently on a roster. He did try out with the Chiefs, didn't make the team. This is somebody who was a very highly touted prospect. Of course, if I remember the whole story correctly, it was like a big deal. He was ranked higher than like Micah Parsons by a lot of, news sites heading into college. But of course, it didn't last. He's with Alabama for 1 year, then he went to Houston, then UT Martin, then Michigan, then Charlotte. So this is somebody who bounced around from team to team. His best thing was being an all-AAC second-team player. He had some good stats, especially at Charlotte, but this is a guy who definitely, he still did, change teams all the time, so there's a lot of question marks about him. And the fact is that this is a weird first pick. I mean, I'll talk about in a video that'll come out later, whether it be next week or 2 weeks, about how the Houston Roughnecks D-line was a huge disappointment. But the fact is, it still is one of, if not the most talented defensive lines in the league. So drafting a position for the D-line is a very weird one, especially with your first pick when you have a lot of other question marks in your roster. Again, this is somebody who has a lot of talent in a sense that, heading into college, he was a very highly touted prospect. But currently not on an NFL roster. It's a weird one. So comes in as the first pick for them. Now their second pick was Trey Fluellen, and this was another one. Fluellen was another player who is not on an NFL roster. Okay, this is a guy who played at Middle Tennessee, really solid player at Middle Tennessee, safety. Ended up having almost 200 tackles. Actually did have 7.5 TFLs, which is really solid. Had 5 interceptions. Was a guy that in his last year had a lot of was heading to be a really solid player, but then he ended up tearing his ACL, and that kind of really just derailed any of his, NFL hope and all that. So this is a player I wouldn't be shocked at all to see in the UFL, but another one where it's just a weird pick. Again, yes, there's a very good chance he'll be in the UFL, but you're picking a guy who is playing safety, who just is coming off a torn ACL. Very risky decision to draft a player like that. This is somebody who, yes, was somebody who was looked to be a really solid player in, the CUSA, but it's an interesting pick. I don't think this is necessarily a bad pick. Again, it kind of fits with a lot of their other picks of getting guys who have a very good likelihood of playing for the Roughnecks in the future or really next year. But again, I just don't really see this one as being a, slam dunk pick. It is a draft pick that will probably be on the team, but we'll see. Now, their third pick was Cam Stutz. This is a solid pick, I think. This is a guy who was at Auburn. He started basically every game this past year, including the Tropical Bowl. He was a starter in 2022 as well. So, for basically 2 years, he's been essentially a starting lineman for a big program in Auburn. Now, offensive line, of course, is a position that is very hard to come by in terms of good players in spring football. So getting as many as you can is a really good thing. Of course, with the Roughnecks, saying that Mark Thompson returns and everything, and Nolan Henderson returns, you're going to need a good offensive line to have that running game be really solid, especially when you have a QB that's a dual threat. So getting your offensive line to be better is a really smart decision. So I actually like this pick a lot. I think this is somebody who definitely needed to be picked high in a sense that, this team just needed those kind of players. The Roughnecks, they needed to get offensive linemen for that reason. So this is a really solid pick. You're getting somebody who's going to help you in the trenches. Were there better offensive linemen available? You can argue that, but at the end of the day, this is a really solid pick. I think this is a good one for the third round. Now, the fourth round pick was Donovan Manuel, FIU position linebacker. Now, this is another pick that is, I actually think this is okay, but look, this is somebody who at FIU this past season ended up having 15 TFLs, 120 total tackles, really solid linebacker in that regard. He did play at Eastern Tennessee before, where he was also a really solid player there. But this is a good pick. I mean, linebacker isn't a position that is super needed for the Roughnecks. They do have still good linebackers. Now, some of them are injured, and some of them didn't perform as well as you expected this past year. But I think that overall, this is a really solid player. I think this is definitely a good linebacker to select. I think that Manuel is going to be somebody who, in the UFL, would be really good. I mean, if you can go and play 12 college games and have 120 tackles, if you can go to the UFL, and if you were to have me like 80 in a course of 10 games, that's incredible. So when you have somebody like that who's able to be like that field general, getting tackles and all that, it's a really solid pick. This is a good selection. I think this is a good one. Now, their 5th-round pick is another offensive lineman in Hayden Gillum. This is a good pick as well. Again, offensive line. This is a guy who was an all Big 12 honorable mention from the coaches and was a second-team academic Big 12. This is twice. He was at K-State this past year and most of his career. So when you look at this, this is a good one. This one, this is a guy who, again, started basically 2 years as a starting offensive lineman for K-State. And again, it's a simple, solid pick. Again, offensive lineman, insanely important in this league. It's very hard to come by good ones. As we talked about in the Showboats video, draft recap, not all of these players are going to go to the UFL. Now, a lot of these players, so far every player we've talked about is currently not on an NFL roster, but a lot of these guys will not play in the UFL. A lot of them will. So if you're drafting guys who have a good shot at playing in the UFL because they're not currently on an NFL roster, and then you're adding that you're drafting multiple of them, you're basically guaranteeing you're going to get at least 1 or 2 guys to actually play for you in that said position. So getting Gillum is a really solid pick in the 5th round for a second offensive lineman. Now your 6th round was Malcolm Epps, tight end. Tight end was an area where the Roughnecks weren't terrible at. They had some issues in terms of injuries, and I think that this is a overall decent pick. Epps is somebody who basically every other year was getting, some actual receptions. 20 receptions, 10 receptions, 9 receptions. His 3 biggest seasons receiving. His last year he was ACC and Pitt, and he only had 9 receptions, but he had 115 yards. Again, it's not always about receiving. Again, as we talked about heading into the season with the Roughnecks, they needed tight ends that were better at blocking than necessarily pass catching. So adding somebody else, another tight end to that room, not necessarily a bad selection. There's other areas in the team you could argue they needed to work on more. But I think this is a solid pick. This is a good one for the Roughnecks. Now, their 7th-round pick was Xavier Benson. Benson is another linebacker selection, this one coming from Oklahoma State. Now, Benson was really solid at OSU. Now, again, it's not like he had, as many overall tackles, but he was playing, in the Big 12, overall really, a much bigger conference and all that. He was a really good player for them. 65 tackles, 76 tackles the, last 2 years in college, and even at Texas Tech, in between, before his junior college stint, he had a decent year. Then he was at junior college where he was also really good there. So I think this is a really solid pick. Again, this is another guy that essentially he was in college for a very long time. I mean, when you were in college in 2018 and you're just coming out, yeah, I'm sorry, but unless you're like, a quarterback, you're really not going to get an NFL shot to most people's eyes. So this is a player that's actually a perfect fit for the UFL. Somebody who, was in college for a huge amount of time and now is, going to try and prove that, hey, it's not just a college player, that he can play in the pro level. So again, odds of him playing in the UFL next year, very high. This is a solid pick for that reason. Again, it's another linebacker, which is questionable, but I think this is a solid pick, all things considered. Good pick. Now, their 8th-round pick was Rashad Williams, cornerback from Texas Tech. The first player that is at this moment on an NFL roster, that being the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, Williams was in college also from 2018. Another one of those, again, why you would DFA, because he was in college since 2018. Now, this is somebody who was at UCLA and Texas Tech, so he was at big schools his entire career in college. And, of course, he was, somebody who did play in a lot of games. And, he did have, almost 40 tackles a couple times. But in terms of interceptions, he only had 1. Again, odds of him going to the UFL all determine on if he makes the roster for the Raiders. But I think, again, cornerback, that's an area where the Roughnecks did need some help in. So I think this is a good pick to try and help that area. So I think this is a solid pick. Again, not much to say. Good pick. Now, the 9th-round pick, Malik Dunlap, another corner. Again, you're trying to shore up that area. If you have an issue somewhere, draft 2 guys for that position. At least 1 should show up. Again, this is a guy that's not on an NFL roster. Another cornerback that played in college from 2018, so a long time ago. 6-year college career. It's a very long time. And again, this guy played at, North Carolina State and Texas Tech. So again, 2 big schools. So probably be on your roster. Really solid. Had 3 interceptions last year. Just talent-wise, again, I mean, this is basically the Roughnecks draft, right? They're essentially saying we're going to draft guys that have a better chance at playing for us than guys who are necessarily more talented, right? We've seen other teams that drafted guys who have very real shots of making NFL rosters, or guys who just simply put are, more talented in college. But the Roughnecks they're basically saying we're going to take slightly less talented players who have a better likelihood of playing for the team, is kind of how I feel their draft is. So, and this is kind of another one of those selections. Then the last one was Jerkarius Spivey. Spivey played at Miss State. Again, they're doubling down in tight end, getting another tight end. He appeared in 52 games, and then 27 of those games and 5 of those of the starts were at Mississippi State. He's also played at TCU. He ended up having like 300 yards in his career and all that. So, overall, another tight end that is probably going to be more of a blocker tight end and all that, but we'll see exactly what happens. Just another tight end selection for the Houston Roughnecks as their last pick. Now, my draft grade for them is going to be a C-. I don't think they were as bad as the Showboats, but I think they're only a bit better. You didn't draft a quarterback, okay? Your 2 quarterbacks that played most of the season were 2 of the worst QBs in the league, in Sinet and Garantano. Henderson looked really solid, but he only had limited game action, right? He only basically played like a couple games. So you didn't draft a quarterback despite you desperately needing one. You didn't really get another running back, which I think you honestly probably should have. I think this team should have gotten another running back. And I honestly wouldn't have been upset with them drafting receivers. Again, they had multiple receivers that didn't work out the way they expected. Isaiah Henney, you can argue exactly what went wrong, but at the end of the day, the fact is it went wrong. And so there's a couple areas where he definitely took some hits. And so while I like that they're doubling down, and I like the strategy of getting players that have a high likelihood of playing for the team, I think that when you look at it as an all things considered standpoint, I don't think they did that good a draft. I think that they kind of went in a hope these guys play for us and are better than, them not making NFL rosters. I mean, it's just, I don't think it was that good a draft. I think it was a pretty poor draft, all things considered. I think that doubling down in the positions they did, yes, it's smart to double down, but you probably should have doubled down in different positions than what you decided to. Tight end doubling down is weird. Doubling down on like D-line or linebacker is a bit odd, but we'll see. I'm giving him a C-. So that'll do it. This has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. Again, I'm doing at least 2 of these a day, so expect 2 more to be out tomorrow on the 19th. And naturally, I will be doing a supercut of this like I did for the dispersal draft, a few months back. I believe I did it for the dispersal draft. And again, if you want to support the channel, think about becoming a channel member for 99 cents a month or more. You get an exclusive video, team emojis, as well as other things. And as always, guys, let me know down below what you think of the draft. And as always, have a great night.